All right, welcome to this special explainer. Today we're diving into a moment in history where humanity literally stood on the absolute brink of total destruction. The tension was unimaginable, and as you're going to see, it's absolutely terrifying just how close we came to losing everything.
To put this into perspective, during the height of the Cold War, a nuclear exchange between the US and the Soviet Union wasn't just going to be some localized tragedy. Experts at the time expected it to wipe out a staggering 70% of the entire global human population.
So it really brings us to this chilling question. Could one single button press actually end the world? Well, this wasn't just some theoretical threat for the history books. For billions of us, our fate quite literally came down to one moment, one submarine, and one button.
Part 1. The Submarine Trap.
Picture this. Lurking underwater, just a few kilometers off the American coastline, was the Soviet B-59 submarine. It was completely isolated in the pitch-black deep, sitting in tense silence, fully armed, and entirely cut off from its headquarters thousands of kilometers away in Moscow. And the danger escalated fast. Deep underwater with zero radio contact, the crew is suddenly rocked by explosions. The US Navy had detected them and started dropping these signaling depth charges. Down in the dark, the isolated Soviet captain assumes the absolute worst, that World War III has already kicked off on the surface.
Part 2. The Cold War Powder Keg.
To understand how we got here, you have to look at the massive ideological divide driving the Cold War. On one side, you had America pushing for global capitalism and free markets. And on the flip side, the Soviet Union was rigidly locked into a communist system of state control and equal distribution. This clash basically turned into a deadly, high-stakes game of geopolitical chess. America had gone ahead and stationed nuclear weapons in NATO-allied Turkey and Italy, literally right on the Soviet border. So, in response, the Soviets desperately started looking for their own staging ground right on America's doorstep.
Part 3. The Secret Cuban Deal.
And that brings us to the spark that lit the fuse. Soviet President Nikita Khrushchev and Cuba's Fidel Castro struck a highly classified pact. They agreed to quietly sneak Soviet intercontinental ballistic missiles right into Cuba. For the Soviets, this countered the American threat in Europe, and it protected a newly communist Cuba from US expansion. But this secret didn't last long, and it rapidly snowballed into an undeniable crisis. Despite initial denials from the White House, a US U-2 spy plane captured shocking, crystal-clear photographic proof of the missiles. President John F. Kennedy's immediate reaction? Plan aggressive, full-scale airstrikes. Part 4. 12 Days of Terror. The next 12 days were arguably the most terrifying in human history. Tensions were so impossibly high that both nations literally sent nuclear missiles up into space. They were put on standby, ready to be detonated in orbit if they reached a peaceful resolution, or dropped directly on targets if total war broke out. Insane, right? It was an absolute deadlock. An airstrike on Cuba meant instant, uncontrollable nuclear war with the USSR. American and Soviet bombers were just constantly circling the skies, while submarines were hiding out in international waters, basically holding their breath, waiting for a single signal to strike. Part 5. The vote to save humanity. Which brings us right back down to that claustrophobic B-59 submarine. Now, their strict fail-safe protocol required the unanimous agreement of all 3 senior officers on board to actually fire their nuclear torpedo. Every single one of them had to say yes. Remember, they're getting rocked by explosions and believe World War III is already raging above them. So, the captain voted yes to launch the nuclear missile. The second officer, he also voted yes. 2 out of the 3 leaders were ready to start a nuclear holocaust right then and there. But one man stood between a fragile peace and total, irreversible annihilation. Enter Executive Officer Vasily Arkhipov. He was the sole dissenter on that entire submarine. He looked at the impossible situation, the escalating panic around him, and firmly said, no. Arkhipov presented a desperate but perfectly logical argument to his furious colleagues. He basically said, look, firing a nuclear weapon without absolute confirmation from Moscow is just too risky. They absolutely could not blindly start a global nuclear war based on a hunch. Against all odds, Arkhipov actually won that intense, hours-long argument. The B-59 was forced to surface,
And once they broke the water, they finally restored contact with Moscow, realized the war hadn't actually started, and were immediately ordered to stand down and head home to the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, above the surface, JFK and Khrushchev had finally managed to defuse the global crisis. They struck a balance, a public agreement where the USSR withdrew from Cuba and the US promised not to invade, paired with a highly secret tactical retreat where the US quietly removed its missiles from Italy and Turkey. So the crisis passed, but it's widely agreed by historians today that Vasily Arkhipov is the ultimate unsung hero of the 20th century. His singular courage and clear thinking under unimaginable pressure is quite literally the only reason we survived the year 1962. As researchers point out when looking at the true stakes of that moment, because of his historic decision, we are alive today. Otherwise, humanity would have been entirely erased. It really puts things into perspective, doesn't it? It's an absolutely terrifying reality of how close we came to extinction, which leaves us with this final haunting thought to take away and consider. In our modern, heavily armed world, are we still at the mercy of one such button today? Thank you so much for exploring this intense piece of history with me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.